Good afternoon, and thank you to the public session of the Halton District School Board Audit Committee. It is 3:30 p.m. I welcome all of our members, and I call this meeting to order. We will begin the meeting with an acknowledgement of the traditional lands. Trustee Rocha, would you please do that acknowledgement for us?
Absolutely. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Arawandron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us.
Thank you very much, Trustee Rocha. Appreciate it. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Seeing none, that takes us to the approval of the agenda. Be it resolved that the agenda for the public session of the Audit Committee meeting for November 9th, 2023 be approved as distributed. Thank you. Moved by Trustee Rocha. Do we need a seconder? Yes, please. Seconded by Trustee Amy Collard. Any questions, concerns, or comments around the agenda? Any additions or deletions? Seeing none, is the consensus around approving the agenda? Thank you. The agenda is approved. We will move into the next order of business, 2.0, ratification and action. The minutes of the Audit Committee meeting, September 26, 2023. Do I have a mover? Be resolved that the minutes from the Public Session Audit Committee meeting held on September 26, 2023 be approved as distributed. Moved by? Thank you, Trustee Rocha. Seconded by Sana. Thank you so much. Any questions, comments, or concerns around those minutes? Seeing none, as a consensus on approving the minutes? Thank you. Those minutes are approved. Appreciate that. Approval of business transacted in private session. There was no business from private session for ratification at this meeting. I will move us to 2.3.1. Action items, recommendations to the board that we will throw first to the 2022-2023 financial statements and accumulated surplus balances. And Superintendent Ngoy, I believe you're going to take us through that, please.
Thank you, and through the chair to the members of the Audit Committee, we are pleased to provide you with the audited financial statements for the fiscal year ended August 31st, 2023. And I would like to start with a big thank you to my team who has put together the statements in a record time, considering that we had four accounting standards, new accounting standards to implement, one in particular that is extremely time consuming. I would also like to thank our external auditors for their work and collaboration throughout this exercise, which started back in, I believe, I'll say March of the year. And of course, for all your time in going through the financial statements with us. So with regards to the financial statements, they include four statements. One is a statement of financial position, or also known as the balance sheet, and it outlines the assets, liabilities, and the surplus of the board. Just a few highlights for the Audit Committee. The cash balances are higher than compared to the prior year, and it's mainly due to the payment for short-term financing for capital projects, which we receive twice a year, as well as the maturity of a portion of guaranteed investment certificates. In terms of other deposits, there is a line item that represents funds held in trust by the board's legal representative for a land transaction. The other investments are formally known as the temporary investments, and they represent the GIC investments that have 3 tranches remaining for a total of 18.75 million, and they will be maturing throughout the current fiscal year. The accounts receivable, just a note with regards to accounts receivable for the government of Ontario, the balances have decreased by 35.7 million, mainly as a result of delayed grant payment and decrease in capital grants receivable. The assets held for sale represent the disposition of one property that had occurred in 2022. So you'll see it in the 2021-22 prior year, but not in the current year. Accounts payable and accrued liabilities are higher by 8.2 million over the prior year, mainly as a result of recording labor provision accruals. The deferred revenue is a decrease of 8 million over the prior year, with and it looks at changes with respect to capital funds used for renewal of school projects, education development charges, as well as the disposition of the asset. With regards to deferred capital contributions and tangible capital assets, there is an increase from the prior year as a result of additional expenses for capital projects, major construction with relation to new school construction for Milton 12 and Oakville 3, as well as a restatement to address the asset retirement obligation balances. Asset retirement obligations, there is an increase or an adjustment to address inflation, and that is 14.05%, as well as offset by a decrease related to work conducted through the year to address some of the liability. Prepaid expenses mainly refer to premiums paid for the insured benefits that relate to this current year, but they were paid in August. And I wanted to move on to the second statement, which is the consolidated statement of operations, or the income statement outlining the revenues and expenses of the board. This one compares to the prior year as well as the budget. And as we look over the budget and the prior year, provincial grants as well as provincial grants other, which are one-time investments in priorities and partnership funds, are higher as a result of additional announced funding, increase in enrollment, and also benchmark increases for labor provisions. Another note is with regards to interest revenue, which is significantly higher over the prior year and budget as a result of 6 increases in the prime rate through the year. And we are reviewing our cash flow daily, as well as opportunities for term investments on a quarterly basis. And the board currently has a prime rate of 5.44%, a rate for overnight investments of 5.44%. School fundraising is starting to return to pre-pandemic levels at 17.4 million. So there were a lot of activities within our schools for co-curricular and extracurricular activities. And other fees and revenues have increased as a result of additional education development charges that were collected, which we use for the purchase of new sites in growth-related areas for new schools, and a transfer to proceeds of disposition for land acquisition. With regards to expenses, expenses are also higher than the budget and the prior year as a result of increase in enrollment and additional funding that was announced, which comes with offsetting expenses. Overall, instruction is higher than budget as a result of increase in leaves, WSIB's workers' insurance board liability actuarial adjustments, and additional offsets in the budgets with regards to non-staffing and minor tangible capital assets. Administration expenses are also higher as a result of labor provisions, medical leaves, retirements, legal expenses, and pre-approved work on the building, the administrative building. Transportation is usually higher at year end than at budget, as it captures the actual fuel costs. It does come with the offsetting revenue increases as well. Pupil accommodation expenses refer to the maintenance and upkeep of schools, as well as temporary accommodation for students in areas of growth. And this have also increased over the year. With regards to how we ended the year, there is an annual operating deficit of 1.3 million. It is as a result of tuition fee deferrals and reductions, lower levels of rental revenue, as well as an increase in short-term and long-term staffing leaves for the year. We've also seen increases in costs for contractual services and supplies that are as a result of inflation and market conditions. There is a 3.3 million in internally appropriated reserves. So it's a deficit that is using a drawdown of 3.3 million of the internally appropriated reserves to fund in-year initiatives that have been approved in the budget. Compared to the budget that was approved by the Board of Trustees in June of the prior year, we have finished the year with 2.6 million better results than expected. So we've used 2.6 million less surplus. And Appendix A of the report that will go to the board summarizes the changes in the drawdown in accumulated surplus. The other two statements included in the package are the consolidated statements of cash flows, which show the change in cash used for operating capital and financing transactions, and the consolidated statement of change in net debt, which summarizes the change in non-financial assets and tangible capital assets. There are a number of notes that accompany the financial statements and provide additional details. I just wanted to draw your attention to a few. The adoption of new standards is identified in Note 2. The asset retirement obligation reconciliation is in Note 11. And it has been updated in Note 14 under tangible capital assets, which also includes changes in land transactions. Note 20 is an updated no disclosure on the postponed consolidation requirement for the Ontario School Board Insurance Exchange. The financial statements are also including the proportional consolidation of Halton Student Transportation Services, which is outlined in Note 23. And lastly, Note 27 is the subsequent event note, and this note discloses a property transaction which was pending closure and actually closed on September 14, 2022. And with that, I would just mention that we have a clean audit opinion, and our external audit partner and manager are here to also walk us through their audit report. And I'll stop there if there's any questions. Thank you.
Okay, so before we move on to the auditor report, we will deal with, is it all, do I do the auditor report then the motion, or do I do the motion then the auditor report?
The auditor report first, because
Okay.
it's information.
That makes sense. So I will look to Lillian Anthony.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lillian.
Thank you. And we will walk the committee through the results of our audit, which is included in your package starting from page 45. Before I proceed to go through primarily our executive summary, just to summarize the key highlights from the audit, we do want to extend our thanks to management, Roxana and her team. It was a very busy year from a financial reporting perspective. It's been a good number of years since there's been a lot of financial standards changes from the school board perspective. So this year was certainly one where there was a lot of heavy lift. So we do appreciate their early involvement with our team to make sure that much of the work that was needed as it relates to the first-time adoption of, in particular, the asset retirement obligation standards was done early, and we could get through some of that work in the summer. So we do appreciate that. We will walk you through, between Anthony and myself, the highlights of the audit, as I've mentioned before. Certainly, some of these items have already been touched on by Roxana previously, so we will just touch on some of the key highlights. Our audit was able to be conducted in line with our audit plan, which was presented to the committee back at the May meeting. There were no changes in terms of our overall assessment of audit risks, which we identified at that time and also highlighted and summarized within this report today. The only change within this report as it compares to our audit plan is really the outcome of the work that we performed in each of these audit risk areas, but our overall assessment remains unchanged. At the time of the audit plan presentation, we did present to the audit committee our preliminary determination of the audit materiality. Materiality really drives the extent of work that we perform as it relates to our audit testing, how much testing we perform, how many samples we perform, as well as thresholds that we apply as part of our overall analysis and analytics on the financial statements. We have included that final figure for your information as part of this package, but are happy to summarize that there were no uncorrected or corrected misstatements as part of our audit. This does mean that the audit report is clean. And really is a testament to the hard work that has been put in by management. We did identify 2 items in terms of disclosure items that we wanted to note for the committee's information. These are consistent disclosure items that we have identified in prior years and really are a function of the template financial statements that are presented and provided by the Ministry of Education. This is something that we very commonly see across many different school board audits as well. So certainly is something that while we are required to report that to you, we do want to flag that it is consistent with what we do see. In terms of the overall status of the audit, we are at a point where our audit is substantially complete with the exception of a few housekeeping items, as well as our requirement to continue to update on any subsequent events all the way until the board approval date of the financial statements. We did flag in terms of our overall highlights in the audit results report that we are monitoring and continuing to monitor any discussions relating to Bill 124 and potential implications in terms of disclosures in the financial statements at this point, but we are at this point continuing to monitor to assess whether or not there is a need for further disclosure in the financial statements right now, which currently the statements do not reflect. In terms of overall going concern, we are required as part of our role as your auditors to assess the ability of the school board to continue as a going concern on an annual basis. So in terms of where you would have seen that in our audit results report, you would see a commentary relating to that, but that is part of our annual requirement. And as I've mentioned before, we are intending to issue a clean audit opinion on these financial statements once they are approved by the board of directors and our final concluding procedures are completed and all the outstanding matters are taken care of. I'm going to ask Anthony to just speak very briefly on the audit risk areas just to close the loop on what we discussed at our audit plan meeting.
Thank you, Lillian. As Lillian mentioned, the risk side of the tables that are on these pages haven't changed from the audit service plan that was presented in May. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time walking through the risks themselves, more focusing on the audit responses and the results of our procedures that we've performed since then. So the first risk on page 50 is revenue recognition, which is the presumed risk of fraud involving improper revenue recognition that comes from our assurance standards. And it also outlines the different sources of revenue where these risks arise from. And part of our audit response and results is testing, design, and implementation of controls in place at the school board surrounding this cycle. And specifically, when we look at grant revenue, we're reviewing funding letters associated and memos issued by the Ministry of Education, along with testing samples of deferred revenue to look for any instances where revenue might have been recorded improperly based on the agreements that are in place and the funding that was provided. We do test a sample of enrollment registers. And one thing that we noted was in the prior year proceeds of disposition relating to sales school properties which have been deferred. And during the current year, there was a purchase of land amounting to $22.6 million, which triggered the recognition of some revenue. Our audit procedures, just overall in line with what Lillian's comments were previously, were that they didn't indicate any evidence of material misstatement. Moving on to the risk of management override of controls. This is another presumed risk, given that management is in a position to perpetrate fraud due to their ability to directly or indirectly influence accounting records. We do discuss fraud with management during our audit process. We also raise this during our attendance with the Audit Committee at different meetings. Specifically, we do test a sample of journal entries and look for business rationale for different transactions that we choose to test in further detail. And through our audit, we determined that the judgments and decisions relating to management estimates, we look for management judgments and estimates to look for potential bias as well. And similarly to the revenue recognition, our audit procedures did not indicate any evidence of material misstatement. We have spoken quite a bit on school-generated and council funds through our other report and previously. So I'm going to just briefly note a few things for that. More or less through our procedures over internal controls at the schools and P cards and processes. Again, our other procedures did not indicate any evidence of material misstatement. The next two risks on the page are government transfers relating to capital contributions and employee future benefits. These are risks in our audit plan, just given the potential for complexity and the nature of some of the estimates involved in those transactions. And similarly to the risks above, and the procedures we performed during the audit didn't indicate any evidence of material misstatement. The larger one that I wanted to spend a bit more time on, just given it's new and we've had our first year of going through our audit procedures for this section, is the adoption of the ARO standards. And as Lillian mentioned, we were involved with management of the school board early in the year and throughout the summer to try to make this as smooth of a transition as possible. And some of the highlights of the procedures we performed and the results, we did discuss with management early on as they were considering the impacts and evaluating a memo that they prepared for us, just outlaying their adoption plan, the results of anything that they had discussed during that time, and some of the controls that they used to ensure that the work that they were performing was complete and wasn't missing anything in terms of potential assets that might be missing from a listing that would include AROs and their process for engaging any specialists as well. We do work internally as well with advisory specialists within Deloitte, specifically to assess the competency and reliability of the ministry model that was used to determine that estimate. And then the main two inputs in that would be the cost of materials as a unit cost, and then the actual number of units themselves, which was determined through management's own expert that we did a separate assessment on as well. We did test a sample of the quantity of inputs, both from a cost perspective and from quantity, in our own audit plan to gauge reasonability of some of those costs for a select sample of schools and ARO liabilities that we just chose for testing. And on the other side of that, the disclosures that you'll see in the financial statements as well, we have to make sure that those disclosures are in line with the public sector accounting standards And during those procedures, we didn't identify any evidence of material misstatement.
So thanks, Anthony. So I'll go through the remainder of the report, but we'll be fairly quick. In terms of other matters, we did want to raise that these financial statements are the consolidated financial statements. So as Roxana has mentioned, they do include the proportionate consolidation of the school board's interest in Halton Student Transportation Services. Halton Student Transportation Services does have a separate auditor, and we do communicate with them as part of our audit to ensure that we have the results of their work and incorporate that in our overall assessment of the financial statements of the school board. As mentioned before, we do also make use of the work of specialists. In this case, our own internal IT specialist to test the systems at the school board's actuary, as well as any of the consultants that are used as part of the asset retirement obligation estimation process. So those have all been assessed as part of our overall work. I won't go through the residual of the report. We do have a number of appendices that outline our responsibilities to communicate with the committee. But maybe I'll pause and take any questions you may have for us.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? I am not seeing any. Are we comfortable with my putting the motion on the floor? Okay, thank you. The motion reads, be it resolved that the Audit Committee recommends the audited financial statements of the Halton District School Board for the fiscal year ended August 31st, 2023, with a potential additional note disclosure v. Bill 124 settlement be approved by the Board of Trustees. I know I stumbled a little through that. Does anyone need to hear it again, or are we good? Thank you. Do I have a mover for that, please? Thank you very much, Amy, and seconded by Sana. Thank you. Are there any questions, comments, concerns around the motion? Thank you. All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Thank you very much. That carries. And thank you very much, Lillian, Anthony, and Roxana, for a very, very thorough overview of some pretty complicated matters and making it so I could understand it. I appreciate that. I'm going to move into 3.0, communication to the Audit Committee. 3.1.1 is supplemental reporting, the annual statement of education development charges report, and I will turn it over to Roxana for that.
Thank you, and for the chair. So the supplemental reporting contains 3 reports that are presented for your information and accompany the financial statements, and they also provide a requirement for annual reporting to the Board of Trustees. They will be part of the package for November 15th board agenda as well. So I'll start with the annual statement of education development charges, which outlines the history of the 7 bylaws that the board has passed in terms of collecting levies that help the school board generate funds to buy sites for new schools in areas where we have growth. The newest education development charge bylaw came in effect in June and is for a 5-year term. Table 1 in the report shows the levies in accordance with the caps that are under the regulation for the 5 years of the bylaw, as well as where the cap is. So you'll see that we are not going to be meeting the cap. We're collecting less than we should based on the appreciation values of the sites that we are planning to purchase in the future. And Appendix A outlines the opening balance, in-year changes, and closing balance in the education development charge account. So we have a modest deficit of 3.3 million at the end of the year, but that is only because a couple of sites purchases have been delayed. The site purchases are very much dependent on municipal approvals and planning and subdivision progress. So in the next couple of years, we're looking at procuring 2 additional elementary school sites and 1 high school site in North Oakville and South Milton. And when we look at that, I would expect to have $70 to $80 million deficit. at that point in time, we will be securing short-term bankers' acceptance loans that will separate the deficit related to this from the operating accounts. Any questions on the first report?
I don't see any questions, so if you'd like to continue.
Thank you. The next report for your information is the annual summary of trustee expenses in accordance with the trustee expense policy. It follows two categories and also provides the overall, in Appendix A, the overall roll forward balance for the remaining prior year reserve, as we call it, which is $136,000, which the Board of Trustees, by motion, accesses for additional PD, professional development opportunities. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you for that. Through you, Chair. The reserve is quite large. And according to this report, it can only be accessed for trustee PD. In my opinion, it's quite a large amount to access only for PD purposes. What other reasons would we be able to access that amount? Or could it be put towards something else? I'm trying to understand the implications of having that money and what are other options.
Perhaps I'll start, and the other trustees may have more history on this. I believe the intention was to use it for additional opportunities that are directly related to carrying out your mandate. And through board motion, the Board of Trustees could decide to allocate it to something else. I'm just not sure if there's anything in the bylaws that will preclude the board to do that.
I will look to my bylaw expert. As to the best of my knowledge, it is accessed through a trustee motion approved at the Board of Trustees meeting, and that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Am I correct, Amy?
So can I follow up? So from an audit perspective, are there any implications as to where this excess could be allocated to?
No. So from an audit perspective, this amount resides in the surplus, right? And it's being rolled forward. And when used, it comes out of the surplus. It will create a small deficit because it's been rolled over. But there is no concern on our part in terms of spending more or allocating towards something different in the current fiscal year. So it really is up to the Board of Trustees.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns? Thank you. Would you like to move on to the summary of school-generated funds?
Thank you. And the last one in this item 3.1.1 is the summary of school-generated funds, which is the annual report outlining the expenses and revenues by panel, secondary and elementary, as well as total for the year compared to the prior years. And we wanted to include pre-pandemic as well, just to give a comparison to a more regular activities year. And the appendices are provided to the report. And you can see there is a roll forward in school generated funds of about 5.2 million. And I know sometimes we do collect funds in advance of an event actually occurring. So there is an amount that we would expect to see, but 5.2 million is greater than that. And we would urge the schools to spend the school generated funds in the year they collect, so that the students that are contributing get to benefit from those funds. Happy to take any questions.
Through you, Chair. The amount that schools fundraise is quite significant. So to me, it shows that they have to raise money to provide equipment, extracurriculars, programming to supplement their learning. Does the amount that the schools fundraise in any way impact how the school board is funded by the government?
School-generated funds are meant to be additional funds for extracurricular activities, so field trips, additional equipment above and beyond if there's clubs, athletic clubs, or other art, music clubs at school. So those are things that are not necessarily funded through public education funds. They cannot be used. So it's very restricted in terms of what it can be used. It cannot be used towards curriculum, instruction, towards adding additional space to a school. So it has to be used on extracurricular type of activities. There may be inequity in the system with schools that can fundraise more and others less. So they could have additional clubs and initiatives and activities with the students that another school in another area may not. It doesn't impact government funding, but from a school board perspective, we do look from equity of funds and we do provide additional resources to schools that have less opportunities to fundraise for things. So we want to be equitable across the system. So we use government funding to supplement some of the schools.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Okay, thank you very much for all that supplemental reporting. I will move into 3.1.2, Halton Student Transportation Services 2022-2023 financial statements, and it's you again.
So one more, and this one is short, is for the information of the Audit Committee. This is the audited financial statements for the Halton Student Transportation Services, which is a legally established consortium. The two-member boards are us and the Catholic Coterminous Board that share in efficiencies for school bus transportation for students. They are audited and have a clean opinion, and they're proportionately consolidated into our financial statements. Happy to take any questions. And this is just for information for the Audit Committee. We continue to update the timelines for the current fiscal year as well as the past fiscal year is now ending with the audited financial statements going to the board on November 15th. The current fiscal year has the budget timelines will be updated with a revised budget and then the quarterly financial reporting through the year. And then soon enough, we'll start one more table for next year's budget as we're starting the planning for that in the next months. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're going to need to bring more water if you're going to be doing all the talking. Are there any questions or comments, concerns around the timelines for financial reporting? Seeing none, I would very much like to thank you and your staff for everything you did to pull this whole agenda together and all the information pieces, because I know it's been a particularly busy time in your department, and this was above and beyond, so please know how very much it is appreciated. Thank you. 4.0, other business. There was none identified during the approval of the agenda, but I will ask if there is any other business. Thank you. Seeing none, that moves us on to 5.0 adjournment. I will note that the suggested date of the next meeting is Tuesday, February 13th, 2024. Please let us know if you have any issues with that. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Sana. Seconded by Tanya. Is anybody not want to adjourn? Do we have consensus around adjourning?
Yes, we do.
Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I appreciate it very much. This meeting is adjourned at 4:11 p.m. Thank you.